I'm Shirley Hershey Showalter, and my new book is called Blush, A Mennonite Girl Meets a Glittering World. I'm going to be reading an excerpt from my book entitled 7 Sweets and 7 Sours. Almost every culture and religion uses food to support its most cherished values. If it's true that we are what we eat, then I am a sweet-sour person. Like most people, I love the food of my childhood. It is my comfort food, even after enjoying many other cuisines. Pennsylvania Dutch food, my childhood staff of life, is famous for its 7 sweets and 7 sours, a cuisine both bland and pungent. Above all, this style of cooking focuses on abundance. It got its name because all 14 of those flavors were supposedly included in one true Pennsylvania Dutch meal. Without 7 desserts or sweet condiments and 7 vinegar-laden side dishes, you didn't have a feast. The label 7 sweets and 7 sours might well have been concocted by the tourist industry, but it has stuck. Lining the Lincoln Highway between Lancaster and Philadelphia are a host of places that compete to offer tourists the real Pennsylvania Dutch dining experience. No one seems to know why the number 7 and why sweets and sours are singled out to the exclusion of the other taste buds found on the human tongue. But my grandmother's spiral-bound cooking notebook and the Mennonite Community Cookbook, which was gleaned from many such notebooks, offers a clue. The 7 sweets and 7 sours are light on vegetables, no need for recipes for those, and heavy on desserts and pickles. 7 sweets and 7 sours also seems a perfect metaphor for my complex relationship with the Mennonite Church. Any cultural group that carries on a tradition separate from the world, yet borrows selectively from other groups and traditions, will create a unique taste culture. In the case of the Pennsylvania Dutch, who had an abundance of pork and flour from the colonial era onward, and who performed taxing physical labor all their lives, the emphasis was on dough, noodles, and dumplings as accompaniments to fatty meat. Since there was so much fat to absorb, vinegar and/or fruit juices became a way to cut the fat. The love of food, prepared well in large quantities, was so great among my kin that we risked one of the classic deadly sins, gluttony. I heard a lot about sin as I was growing up. The 7 deadly ones included pride, envy, gluttony, lust, anger, greed, and sloth. The only one I never heard preached about was gluttony. If Mennonites needed a sinful outlet, a transgression they could overlook, perhaps gluttony was their safety valve. They could make up for the tolerance of one vice by denouncing the others more vigorously. 7 deadly sins. 7 sweets. 7 sours. They all include the perfect number 7 contained in biblical bookends, the 7 days of creation in Genesis and the 7 seals of Revelation. The Hebrew word for 7, shavah, is closely connected to sabah, meaning fullness or plenty. So perhaps 7 sweets and 7 sours carries sacred meaning we didn't recognize. The feeling of physical and social and spiritual well-being, of eating a meal overflowing with every kind of food, and extended family and friendship did, at least sometimes, seem holy. Theological background aside, what would a 7 sweets and 7 sours menu actually look like? The 7 sours are largely side dishes: pepper cabbage, pickled beets, red beet eggs, and chow-chow, a beautiful combination of pickled corn, lima beans, green beans, cucumbers, green pepper, red pepper, and onions. The 7 sweets tradition includes up to 20 kinds of pies. Most are fruit or custard, But the king of all pies is shoe fly. Shoe fly is simple and inexpensive to make, from molasses, flour, brown sugar, eggs, butter, and water. It tastes best when served warm with hand-whipped cream on top. What pecan pie is to the South, shoe fly is to the Pennsylvania Dutch. Everyone's childhood is some mixture of sweet and sour. My Mennonite childhood was sweetest when surrounded by family, including the 40 families in our church who called me by name and knew where I lived, what grade I was in, and what part I sang when we opened the hymnals together. A phrase from a new hymn describes this kind of community perfectly. We are each other's bread and wine. It was easy to imagine Jesus eating with his disciples when we sat down to a meal. We knew that our job would be to care for the people cast out by the rest of society, the strangers, the way Jesus did. It took me years to notice some of the sour among the sweetness of our church. Now I see the irony that Mennonites thought it necessary, in order to follow Jesus as perfectly as possible, to exclude those who dressed or talked loud, divorced, drank, or danced unless they repented. If they were ever in a disaster, we would come to their aid. But if they wanted to join our church, they would have to adopt plain dress and a modest lifestyle, following the ordinances in the Statement of Christian Doctrine and Rules and Discipline of the Lancaster Conference of the Mennonite Church. After baptism, women would have to grow their hair long and put it under a covering, and give up all vices except gluttony before we would let them in. I discovered along the way that most groups had some kind of sourness hidden in them. I began to see that identity formation always includes an us and a them. It's easy to see all sweetness in us and all sour in them. Though my branch of the Mennonite Church has relaxed the rules requiring church members to be plain, I admire many conservative Mennonites who continue to maintain boundaries between the plain church and the glittering world. We still get together for family reunions and in service activities like Mennonite disaster service and relief sales. What brings us together best? Food.